Welcome to Science of Slink, the evidence-based pole podcast with me, your host, Dr. Rosy Boa. Today, very excited, we're talking about shoes. Eee! That's our theme at the studio all this month, which is June 2025, and I wanted to talk about some of the stuff that I really wish everyone knew about shoes, dancing in shoes, what to look for in a shoe, why we're always talking about rocking your weight forward onto the box, that's this front part underneath the ball of your foot, how to avoid foot cramps, whether or not it causes bunions, all that good stuff. Before we do that, first off, big shout out to my members. This wouldn't be possible without y'all. If you're only listening, I'm doing the heart made with the thumb and the forefinger. That's for y'all. If you're interested in joining us, the membership is called Science of Slink, and actually you can just go to scienceofslink.com and it should redirect you. And the other thing before we get into it is, of course, I think important to remember and call out that dancing in heels is from strip clubs, right? And pole dance, as we know it, comes from the origin of strip clubs. Good to acknowledge that our art form comes from sex workers. They deserve our support. One of the things the studio does is every month, 1% of all receipts goes to 3 different organizations. One's Richmond Reproductive Freedom Project, which is my local abortion fund. One is Trans Lifeline. And then the third is Lysistrata, a BIPOC sex worker run mutual aid fund. So I think it's important as pole dancers that we support sex workers, and that's one of the ways the studio does it. Also, if you are involved in sex work in any capacity, I'm not going to ask any questions, but you can use the code ISWORK, all one word, work with an O, to take 75% off of any drop-in class, because I want to make sure that if you are interested in my training, it is financially accessible to you. Let's talk about heels. Let's talk about the mechanics of dancing in heels. Let's talk about the shoes themselves. Really dig into it. This is going to be a pretty information-packed episode that I realize, especially for my members, right? Like, I don't want to spend a lot of class time necessarily like going into lecture mode. So hopefully as we're working in heels this month, this information is going to be helpful for you. You can like think back to and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Rosie said this other place. First off, why is dancing in heels harder? So there's a couple of reasons here. One is balance, and that's part of the reason why this month we're doing heels. Last month we did spun pole. The month before that we did just straight up balance vestibular training, is because all of those things have to do with the vestibular system and your sense of your position in space and controlling that. Heels are harder for balance for a couple of reasons. One, the amount of coverage on the floor, the amount that you're actually touching the floor, is less, assuming that you have more or less a normal human foot. The sole and the stiletto is just less surface area, right? So that would make it a challenge. Another is that it moves your center of gravity higher. And in general, if you're familiar with what were they called? Weebles? It's basically like a bowling pin shaped toy with sand in the bottom, and you like push it and it comes back to center. It's really hard to push over because the center of gravity is really, really far down. Whereas if you flipped it over so the sand was on top, you could push it over instantly. In fact, wouldn't balance. When you put yourself up an additional 6 to 10 inches, your center of gravity moves higher, you become less stable. So that's one thing. They're just harder to balance. Another thing is that they have weight, right? So heels are basically ankle weights, and some heels weigh more than others. So in my experience, Hella heels tend to be a little bit heavier than pleasers. When I first got started, Hella didn't exist, right? It was pleasers or nothing. And also you couldn't buy directly from pleasers. You had to like get together and do a group order and like, the old days. Let me know in the comments if y'all remember that, if you were around for that. So they're weights. Boots are heavier than sandals. And they're at the end of a long lever, right? Because your legs are, for most people, your longest limb, right? And you are putting something heavy that not only makes them longer, but is at the very end of a long lever. So you think in just simple physics, right? If we're moving the same amount of weight farther away from the fulcrum, it requires more power to move, right? And when we add heels, we are adding weight, and so it requires more power. So something like even just lifting your leg in front of you is going to be harder in heels than without heels because of that additional weight, that additional resistance. Also, it changes stickiness, especially if you really rely on the front of your ankle as a contact point, particularly in something like a pole climb. Boots in particular are generally less sticky than skin on the front of the shin because you got the laces and you got the eyes, and those eyes could be like hooks or they could be like like grommet set into the boot. Usually on my boots, I'll actually remove the hooks. I like pleasers. I'll remove the hooks and replace them with just grommets. You can get like a little kit at a craft store for not very expensive, and then you can replace them as they wear out. The point is that laces themselves, not particularly sticky. So if you want to stick good and you are climbing and you want that contact point with the back foot, a lot of times people will flex the back foot to take this part, the outside, which both on sandals and on boots are going to be a little bit more sticky than just the laces, onto the pole. So a lot of times, particularly people who have a background working in clubs, will flex the back foot in a climb because they gotta wear shoes as part of their work attire, and that's why. So if you are climbing primarily in boots, flexing the back foot may be more secure and may help you get better stick. You don't have to, particularly if you've got pretty good quad strength, right? You can extend that leg into the pole and get a little bit more pressure, but especially if you're a little bit larger in the body, you're just lifting more weight, or if you are still working on developing that strength, flexing the back foot might be a little bit more helpful there. So that's why heels are harder, right? I think no surprise there. I think especially if you dance in heels, you're like, yeah, that makes intuitive sense. But I also want to talk a little bit about what to look for in a pole heel. You'll hear people say that you should never pole dance in anything except specifically designed heels for a pole dance. I don't necessarily think that's true, right? I think that if you can find something that works for you, you should use it. I personally prefer pleasers. It's what I'm most used to. And I also tend to prefer this stiletto that is round on the bottom over this stiletto that is a half moon on the bottom. I should probably clean those. I use all my heels, obviously. But if you were looking at a pair of shoes and just being like, okay, could I pole dance in these? This is what I would look for. So first of all, platform. Right? You want most of the height to come from the whole foot being lifted rather than just the heel, because the greater the distance between the heel and the ball of the foot, the more pressure it's putting on the forefoot, generally the less stable you're going to be, and also the worse it's going to hurt. So I would absolutely not recommend any shoe that really puts your foot at a very sharp angle is not going to feel great to dance in. And also you're going to need a lot more mobility to rock forward over the box in the ankle, right? Because if you're starting here, you don't have a lot of space left, whereas if you're starting here, you got much more space. If you're just listening, I was doing something with my hand, but it was maybe illustrative. You also want to make sure, whatever you're looking at, that the stiletto is nice and thick, right? This is not a pencil, right? So here's my thumb for reference. It's a very sturdy stiletto, and it's also incorporated into the shank. So a lot of times with heels, you'll see that the shank here and the stiletto here are actually two separate pieces, and there's a seam here between them. Do not dance in those. That creates a weak point in the shoe, and you absolutely can break a stiletto off. It absolutely is possible, and it's much more likely if you've got separation between the two here. So one big thing. And one way to check whether or not they're securely attached or not, especially, so here you can see the plastic on this clear heel. On this one that's wrapped, you can't actually. So I would check by taking the stiletto and the ball of the foot and just really pulling your hands together and apart, and they shouldn't wiggle. It should be one solid piece that has no give and no play between the stiletto and the shank. Also, another thing to look at is you want a lot of material going over the top of the foot, and you want the amount, how much of the material is connected to the platform to be a lot. The more, the better. So actually this style here that does not have the straps and the style here that does have a strap, this style has even more connection between the platform and the vamp, this upper. And that's good. You want as much contact there, as much stability there as possible. That is where shoes tend to break for me, as they tend to come apart right here, because we're putting a lot of pressure upwards onto the vamp as we're dancing and as we're rocking. So we want that to be a really, really secure connection. I would definitely not recommend anything strappy. Some of the pleaser styles, this vamp is actually elastic. I would strongly recommend against those, even if you're a very experienced dancer, because you're going to have a harder time creating a firm connection between the platform and your foot, which we'll talk about in just a second. Also, and this maybe goes without saying, you want the actual platform itself to be made of thick, durable clackable material, right? Like you want something that you can clack and it will be fine. Do not dance in cork heels, please. Your feet and your ankles are not going to thank you. So those are the things I would look at. And if you can find a shoe that's not, but pleasers, etc., that works for you and fulfills those requirements, be my guest by all means. And also specifically for pleasers, for sizing, I would recommend, if you're a half size down for the pumps or sandals, and size up for boots. You do not want your boots to be too tight. And the other thing you do want to look for is you want to look for at the bottom of the platform, underneath the platform, you want it to be right underneath the toe, rounded a little bit so that you have a little triangle here that you can come up on and pivot on. Which brings me to my next question. Why are we pole teachers, constantly talking about pivoting on the front of the box? Couple reasons here. The main sort of thrust is we don't want to drag the heel on the ground, the stiletto on the ground as we're turning, and as we're dancing, we're turning kind of a lot. A couple of reasons for this. So one, that puts lateral shear motion this way onto the heel itself, and they are weaker in that direction, right? They're designed to deal with force coming down from the top. They're designed to hold your weight. Shearing laterally side to side could potentially put them at greater risk for breaking, particularly if you do it a lot. And if you're dragging the full sole and the heel rather than just pivoting on this smaller surface area, you also are going to be putting more torque on specifically, your knee and your ankle. And you can absolutely train so that you are in a place where it is stable to have a lot of torque on the bottom leg, especially folks who are doing things like soccer or rugby or something else that's very athletic with a lot of quick direction changes will train for that. If you're training for that, fantastic. Most pole dancers aren't. I generally am not. And the challenge there is that if you were really twisting, so the knee is not moving, but the bottom of your foot is, because it's dragging, right? And you're introducing some rotational torque. That's when ACL tears happen. So always important to be up on the ball of the foot to reduce friction in general, to make it easier to pivot, also to reduce lateral shear on the stiletto, and also just to, put a little bit less stress on your ACL, which, bodies are resilient. Your ligaments can take some stress. That's what they're there for. That's what they do. But good to know that we're doing it, to prepare ourselves for it, and to reduce unnecessarily if we don't need to. Something else that I really wish everyone did before they got in their heels is warmed up properly. And the reason, it's interesting because usually when people talk about warming up for heels, they really focus on the ankles and ankle stability. To be frank, if you've been doing pole for a while and you've been doing a lot of stuff up on the ball of your feet, probably you've already done a lot of work on your ankle stability. What tends to be the issue for folks more often, in my experience, is foot cramping. It's strength in the foot itself, because when I'm wearing heels, I am actually thinking about curling the foot, right? I'm trying to drag the ball of my foot and my heels together. And that creates a connection between the shoe and my foot where there's tension. So the shoe isn't wobbling around my foot. I'm really pressing my arch up into the vamp. And this is what makes shoes look like they're part of your foot, right? This is what gives you a lot of control. This is what gives you a lot of sensation of contact coming up from the ground. It really lets you have control and stability in your heel, but it does require quite a bit of strength in the foot, and specifically strength in the intrinsic muscles of the foot, the muscles that have both their attachment points within the foot itself. So what I would recommend is warming up those intrinsic muscles before you put your shoes on. Not only will it help to reduce cramping because you're increasing circulation, it'll also prepare you to find that sort of cupping shape with your foot. And just a very simple exercise, we do a more thorough warm-up in class, but a very simple exercise, even if you don't know how to do the short foot or doming, which most people in the world have not. Put your foot flat on the ground, even weight, heel under the big toe, under the little toe, and then lift all 5 of your toes up off the ground. And if you look at the side of your foot, you should be able to see the arch curling as you do that. And just, 15 to 20 per foot will help to warm up the arch of the foot and will help reduce cramping. Also, another big cause of cramping is just lack of circulation, lack of blood flow. So dehydration. If you're not drinking a lot of water, you're much more likely to get cramps just in general. So make sure you're hydrating. If you're sweating a lot, make sure you're replenishing those electrolytes, your salt, your potassium, so that your muscles are functioning optimally, and that'll be great for your whole body. But you really want to make sure that you're getting blood down there, right? That's what's going to help prevent cramping. If you're familiar with the term claudication, right? So if you've got restricted blood flow to your feet at all, and while you're exercising, you're getting a lot of cramps in your feet and your calves, definitely talk to a doctor if that's something that's coming up for you. But if it's just your feet, just when you're in heels, a couple things you can do. So one thing is avoid spending too much time on your back doing leg work with your legs in the air, particularly if you tend to have lower blood pressure, because it's easier for blood to go down than up. And if you are putting your feet that you're trying to get a lot of blood and goodness flowing into up, it's just going to be a little bit more challenging to get the blood up there. So if you notice you get cramps when you do that, do less of it, work up to it. Also, make sure that your boots aren't too tight, particularly if you like to feel very snug in your boots. One thing I've noticed people do, especially when they're new to heels, is they will really tighten their boots super, super, super tight. It just needs to be tight enough that you can't get a finger in between, the side of your boot and your leg. And you really don't want to cut off circulation because, again, the muscles of your feet are really, really working, and you want to make sure they're getting all the blood that they need to be able to contract well. Also, if you notice you get a lot of cramping in boots, you might prefer pumps, right? Because there's just less constriction on the legs. Something that you can try and see how it works for you. And finally, I just want to put this at the end. Every time I talk about heels, every time I teach heels, somebody brings up bunions. And it's an extremely persistent myth that is not backed up by the evidence that wearing heels causes bunions. It does not. Bunions are genetic. However, if you are predisposed to bunions, wearing heels may be more uncomfortable for you. And in that case, I would recommend trying some of the wide sizes. I believe Pleaser now offers wide sizes. That's another change since I started dancing. Just so you're giving yourself a little bit more room. Another thing that you can do, particularly if you've got a plastic upper, what you can do is you can put on socks, take a hair dryer, warm up the plastic of the vamp, that's this top part here, and then while the plastic is still warm and pliable, and it'll get soft, you'll notice, stick your foot with socks on so you don't burn yourself into the shoe, and then let it cool around your foot, and it'll shrink a little bit as it does, so you'll get a better fit. And if you do have bunions, it might make a little bit more room for them and feel a little bit more comfortable. So definitely a good thing to try. Can also give your heels a little bit more life. So that's all I've got for you today. Very excited this month to do heel stuff with y'all. We got started, I'm recording this on Tuesday, we got started on Monday, and it was a great time, and I can't wait to dance with you. And if you'd like to dance with me, I teach classes online. I teach every week, 5 classes a week. You can attend 5, you can join through the recording, or of course, if you're like, I do at least 1 class a week with you, Rosie, you should join the membership because that's cheaper. That'll save you a little bit of money. But that's all I've got for you. I hope you are staying well, taking care of yourself, taking care of people in your life, and happy Pride. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.